welcome back to another episode of Just a Squirrel Looking for a Nut,
But
trying to
trying
get
to
out
get
of
out of this
this.
rut. What are you trying to do? Create a new rut for us, Oleg? Come on. It is just Oleg and I tonight,
was.
folks. Although our regular host, Tripp Bodenheimer, may show up. He's caught up in a work emergency, and so is going to be doing the very best that he can to be here. Oleg, I was so excited about tonight that I could barely breathe. I've been holding my breath since I woke up this morning at 8 a.m. And in fact, the only reason I even didn't hold my breath earlier was that I had to breathe when I sleep.
Uh-huh.
Or did I? How much control do you have over your breathing?
Not much. Not much, I could say that. And I think part of it actually, there was a story experience. I went whitewater rafting here in Ecuador this past couple of days ago, and one of the things that ended up happening was our boat actually flipped. And I'll tell you,
whoa! Let me just say that. What happened? Tell us the story, my brother. Come on, you can do better than that. The power of your story. I want to feel its power.
We're rafting down the river, and it was 5 of us in the boat, and we got to a point within the rapids where we're about to encounter class 4 rapids. So for anyone who doesn't know what it is, class 4 is one of the highest rapids. I think it's class 6 is the highest. And so there's this rapids that we go around it. The guy thought the best possible option was and I remember one moment where he had told us to get in, which it means you get in the boat. We got in the boat, and next thing I noticed is the boat had flipped entirely. And then within probably seconds of that, yes, I was under the boat, struggling for water, struggling for breath, as well as some of the other people who were in the same boat as I was.
Oh my God.
And I realized, in that moment how, it was intense. It truly was, it felt like a life or death situation, grasping for air, grasping for breath.
How deep was the water?
And I realized in that moment how I was very deep. But more importantly, the rapids were very strong. They were extremely strong, and for anyone that's going to be listening to this, or maybe yourself included, there on activities like this, at least in this part of South America, there was no waiver, there were no liability forms. Yeah. So, it was. If anything, I would say it was $25 well spent.
Wow! And did you have a life vest on? At least that.
I had a life vest, and that was probably the thing that ended up saving me the most, because I remember vividly I was going in the water, in and out. First, I had to go from under the boat to the surface, and that was a journey of its own, because if you think about it, there's this huge boat, a rubber boat, it weighs quite a bit, plus with all the water containing it, it's very hard to flip. So myself and one other person were under the boat the whole time, and then we had to essentially make our way around it. And then once we got out of it, it wasn't the end of it, so to speak. One of the things that I had to do is, I remember the thing that the instructor or the guide had told us, and that is, close your mouth, because the more water you swallow, the harder it becomes to breathe. And so I closed my mouth the entire time. Not the entire time, but from time to time, and just trying to remember mentally all the instructions he had given us before. And that is, you had to swim on your back with your legs facing the same direction as the current. So that way you could essentially float.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And then I remember within a couple seconds of that, getting some visualization that here's a boat. Maybe I grab onto it. Maybe there's a way he can pull us up. So I grabbed onto the boat, only to realize that the boat was still flipped upside down, but the guide was on top of it. He was trying to flip it again. And once he had flipped it, he was able to pull me up by my straps from the life jacket.
Oh my God.
And I couldn't be happier to be alive. To be alive. It was one of those moments where it's like, it was so difficult to process. It's like, wow, I can't believe that happened. And yeah, we're very fortunate to get the other 4 in the boat.
Yeah. Let's talk about this for a few more minutes before we get into the substance, because some of what you're
Of
saying
course,
actually does
of
relate
course.
directly to what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
So when the boat flipped over,
Hmm.
tell us, how big was this boat?
This was I don't know. It was big enough to probably fit 8 to 10 people.
Okay. And there were four of you in the guide on the boat.
Yeah, four of us. Yeah, four of us plus the guide.
And then when it flipped over, was was there an air pocket underneath the boat, or was it just like a flat bed that was completely? Was there any air between the bottom of the boat or the hard surface of the boat and the water, or was it all the surface, the top surface of the boat, totally submerged?
No, there was some air, but the problem of it was that the rapids were so strong, and essentially, I mean, it's just waves. Like if it was flat water and the boat was on flat water, then I think it would be more manageable to breathe, because then you could at least get above the surface of the water and have that air pocket that's available to you. But because the rapids were so strong, the water was coming from all kinds of directions.
Oh my
So in a
God.
way, like it didn't really help. I mean, I kid you not. I would be lying to you if I told you that there were a couple moments in the waterway where the thought of this might be the last thing
Oh
um,
my God.
actually became a reality. Yeah. So it was all great. It was all fun and games before, and until it's not, until you
Well,
literally can't, you struggle for air.
yeah, and let me just talk about that, because if I were underneath,
Mhm.
so you started out directly underneath the boat and it was just twirling around. So there might have been air, but you couldn't, I
Yeah.
assume, predict where those air pockets were going to be. So you couldn't just go up to that. And even if you did,
Hmm.
it sounds like if you were in rapids, your head could have been hit by anything flying around there.
Yeah. 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 Rocks, anything.
And so then, and it was really deep. So you, of course, had the choice to go down. I did when it went over, did you have time to hold your breath?
No.
And so you had to figure out, with a nominal amount of oxygen inside your body, just the normal part
Yeah.
that we might have without breathing in, you had to figure out to go around the boat and get
Hmm.
above water. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, it was a
Were you
true
even
survival mode.
thinking?
No, I wouldn't say it was. I think it was a true survival situation. Instinct kicked in when I was under that boat. Because here's the other thing: when we were sitting in that boat and we were approaching that wave, I don't think any of us realized the fact that we're going to have to possibly hold our breath while we're still above the surface on the boat. I don't think any of
Yeah,
us
of
realized the
course.
possibility of the boat flipping the way that it did.
Yeah.
And once the boat flipped, I mean, it happened so fast that I think the event itself took over most of my concentration, where I didn't have the time to properly prepare, such as hold my breath or possibly float or get away from the boat. And the rapids were so strong that it ended up carrying some of us. I mean, one of the people in the boat, it ended up carrying him all the way through. He couldn't get back onto the boat until a kayak was able to rescue him. So it was a really intense situation, to say the least. But to answer your question, I think my only thoughts literally were, I need to somehow get back onto the surface. I need to get away from the water, because I had swallowed so much water already that it was becoming very difficult to breathe.
God.
And I mean very difficult to breathe, as in like I was coughing up water and I'm still in the water.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So,
And you're right. I mean,
so
this
there's a
isn't South.
possibility I might not have made this podcast.
Yeah, I mean yeah, and that's the reality of traveling in developing countries. They don't have the legal system that we do.
No.
There's no guarantee that as just a tourist there you're going to be protected, and they don't have the regulatory infrastructure. And even if they did, it's not enforced. And being blunt, a lot of times life is not valued the same way in some of these
Yeah.
countries. You're just, who are you? I'll
Yeah.
share before we get into this why I relate to this so much. So in earlier, a couple of years ago, when I was a little bit younger,
Back in the golden days.
back in the golden days, 2 years ago when I was 18, my husband and I went to Mexico, and they
Mhm.
have these cenotes there that are these caves that have rivers going through them. And near these cenotes, they have things called eco parks, which are basically amusement parks, but they are not like American amusement parks with mechanical rides, but they're amusement parks that have attractions that are water-based. Maybe some of them had some mechanical bases. I don't remember that. I don't remember much about it except us doing a canoe that was really beautiful and fun. Maybe like we went, they have things like gigantic bird pens. So we went into this like gigantic aviary and looked around, and they have little rides that you can go on the boats through the jungle and hope to see an animal or two. And then they had this thing that was, and they had a beach, and near the beach, they had this really, really deep hole in the ground. And in that hole was wide enough, it was huge, actually. It was filled with seawater, or maybe it was lake water, underground water, I don't remember. But you could go into it, and they had a little pathway with a rail clear down to the bottom of this that was quite deep. And you could see fish and other animals that were in that pool. And what they did to enable you to do that was they literally had, like from the 1800s, a helmet that was in the shape of a shoulder, and it was like an astronaut helmet, right? Like you put one of those things on your head, it rested on your shoulders. That air pocket was what gave you oxygen as you went through this. And I went down, 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 and my things started to fill up with water. So I signaled that I needed to go back up, and they said, okay, why don't we just readjust it on your shoulders? And they did, and I went down again, and then it started to fill full of water. And then I came back up, and they said, okay, why don't you actually then just why don't you just lean your head back like this while you're going under? And I did that, and water went up to like here. It wasn't made for someone. I was very broad shouldered, and so it was not made for someone like me. It just didn't fit. And by the time with my head back there, I realized it was going to get this high. It was, if I had been down just for another second or two, it would have submerged my mouth, and then my nose would have not been far behind. And it was a terrifying, terrifying experience. And David, of course, my husband, just sort of, he fit perfectly. He went through the whole thing and had a grand old time. But imagine, one of the things that was scary about that was they were like, kind of like, okay, no big deal. Like, okay, there was none of this, are you okay? There was none of this like waiver signing. They were like, just be careful when you're down there. It's up to you. So really, I mean, we got a sense that if I died, it sucks to be me. Next customer, please.
Yeah.
So I think that's important.
And and it's real, and it really gets. I've never personally experienced a situation like that with water before. I mean, I've been in swimming pools where the breathing became a little bit problematic, but this, at least in a swimming pool, I felt that there was some sense of control, right? And that is when you go to the bottom of the pool, or when you're, I don't know, in the middle of it, like you know that there's a possibility of you to get up. And when you do get up, it's flat water, so you're able to grasp for air and gain control of the situation. This situation was drastically different because I was in the midst of water, or in the midst of rapids that I truly had no control over. So even when I did get above surface,
and we're having some technical difficulties here, folks. So I'm just going to keep us entertained for a few minutes. One of the things that must have been scary about this for Oleg would have been the rocks there too. Why are we talking about this? Well, it's because breathing is so fundamental to who and what we are. We all know that we can't live, as obviously, if we're not breathing or not. And it suddenly was at risk. Yet he had to, on an instinctive level, figure out how to breathe. And he also had to instinctively exert control over the rest of his body. Now, the reason why this story, I feel, relates to the main topic is that I find it, Oleg finds it too, I believe, pretty mysterious that we are able to sometimes control our breathing. Under what circumstances do we control our breathing? Under what circumstances do we not? In an emergency situation, Oleg, welcome back. It appears as though you were not able to assert true control over your breathing, that your desire
Yeah.
to reach the surface and avoid the rocks overruled anything else. What
Yeah.
differentiates that from your perspective from a situation in which you are able and willing to control something as automatic as breathing?
Well, I think first of all is I don't believe I can control the breathing at all because I don't even understand how it works to begin with. And I know it's taken me quite some time to understand, and I don't believe I even fully understand it to this point, the whole concept that every moment could be your last or every breath could be your last.
Does that
I
scare
can't say
you?
I fully it scares me to a degree, but it also just makes me realize how little I actually know when it comes to all of the things that give me the opportunity to be alive. I I truly, I think I would be lying to you if I told you that I fully understand it. Now, maybe because I haven't experienced a situation where I was in a position of experiencing the last breath, therefore I don't really understand what that means. I understand it conceptually, but have I lived through a situation like that? I can't say that I have. And even in this situation where I was stuck under the boat and then trapped in the rapids, I was still able to experience some moments of breathing. But like I said earlier, there were times where it became a true challenge. It became a huge challenge to be able to breathe because every time I would breathe, I was coughing up air. So that was a scary part. It was a scary part in knowing that this might be the last thing. And I think what it also made me realize in that moment was how resilient, if that's the right word to use in this case, I truly was. Like I mean, I was literally going to claw into the last inch
Mhm.
to get back onto that boat. Yes, I might have had there might have been a possibility where I could have accepted the circumstances for what they were and said, "Okay, this is it. I can't breathe anymore. My lungs are filled up with water." But I wasn't willing to give up. And I think if anything, what I'm realizing, maybe that's natural. Maybe that's the natural instinct that kicks in when you're in situations like that. So, but going back to your question, situations where I can and can't control my breathing, I, to be honest with you, I don't know if I can ever control it. There are certain situations where I might be able to pay more attention to it, but as far as how the next breath comes, at what speed or anything like that, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I could give you an example where I've stood on a stage. I'm sure you have as well, knowing that both of us are public speakers. Would stand on a stage and all of a sudden the nerves and everything kicks in, the heartbeat starts to go faster, the breath increases, and that's where it starts to become more evident that I'm out of control with my breathing. So techniques like meditation, slowing down my breath have helped tremendously, but I just wonder to what degree is just me being able to put attention to it. But I don't know how the breath is actually able to slow down and get to that point. Like, do you understand it? How well do you
I
understand
don't.
breathing in a
And
situation like that?
yeah, I don't. But I have some thoughts about it. I know someone
Yeah.
once who was in a similar boating accident, only this was in the wide ocean.
Mm,
And as this person, it was a man, was dealing with the water. And again, it was relatively placid for the ocean. They were paddling and paddling and paddling, just sort of trying to tread water until the boat was able to until some sort of rescue or some sort of raft was able to get in their direction, and they were taking
right.
in water and they were starting to get really tired. And as they took in more water, this person told me that he gradually and calmly said, "I'm drowning," and as he could feel water coming in his lungs,
Mm,
and he said it was a serene feeling. I've also read accounts of people who are drowned, who have nearly drowned, or lifeguards who observe people who are drowning. And according to at least some of those accounts, I don't want to pretend to be anything approaching a definitive expert on the topic, but according to the
mm,
accounts that I have read, there can be sometimes a moment of extreme panic before the person seems to submit. And
yeah.
those things have always reminded me of another situation in which instincts that we view as automatic seem more or less under control, or maybe the systems that control them within the individual are themselves so just blinkered out they don't work. But I remember watching like wildlife documentaries. You would see a leopard or a lion or a tiger or a hyena or whatever it was attack a herbivore, usually on the neck. And you would see the herbivore fight, and then just stop. Yet the herbivore was clearly not dead. It was literally, while its eyes appeared open, it might have its, its legs or its hooves moving. It might have some like tiny little like kicks, but not really. It's clearly not dead, but it's not fighting anymore. Yeah. And I've always wondered what's going on there. It presumably is in pain because literally the carnivore is ripping its flesh out. How could that not be painful? And I was curious about that. What on earth could have been going on in those animals' heads? Like, did they just say to themselves, okay, I'm not fighting anymore, let me just make it easy? But animals don't seem capable of that level of rational thinking. Maybe it's a subconscious thing. I did read once an explanation. Of course, no animal has lived to tell this story. But the belief that they think, knowing the way that the brain works, is that the endorphins that are coming from the fear response, and then just the physical sensation of being attacked like that, the excitement, all of that just overwhelms the brain's ability to think at all. And so the animal is just sort of either in a just complete state of confusion or just kind of like dazed, like, okay, this is happening. I'm not feeling anything, almost like a sense of dissociation, and so they're able to be ripped to shreds without necessarily suffering as we might think they would be suffering, or at least explaining this submissiveness. And so what I also wonder when it comes to breathing is whether there comes a point where our brains become so overwhelmed with sensation that they stop functioning that way too. Yeah. And so maybe in some way or another, what we might imagine the feeling of losing control over the breath might not be anything that relates to reality at all.
Is that the thing is that the fundamental thing that makes all of us alive? The ability to breathe? I would say so, right?
I mean, the technical definition of death is when brain activity stops. And one of the things that, at least to my eyes...
And is that possible without breath?
Well, like, what I don't know is, what about if there's nominal brain activity, but the body is breathing only because of artificial means? Well, one fear that I always had with COVID, and, and it's scary, is the idea of being intubated and having to breathe with a tube down your mouth. The idea of, and I'm sure there's people that are listening to or watching this and they've had that happen to them. So if you have, by all means, talk to us about it. But to me, that seems like also singularly terrifying. But maybe you don't care. Like, I don't even know how they would get this down my mouth without me freaking out and panicking. Maybe they give you morphine or something like that. So again, you're not responding. Melody, welcome back to the show. It is always so good to see you. We're talking about whether you can control breathing or not. And do you know how to breathe? We're talking now about panic situations or situations in which life and death is at stake, and how we feel, at least in some experiences that Oleg recently had, that he was very close to death and not really in control of breathing. But then the question I have related to that is, well, but then how can we control breathing at all? Like, what differentiates that situation from meditation, for instance? Oleg, do you meditate? And Melody, do you meditate? Anyone else watching, listening, do you meditate?
I do. I do from time to time, not on a consistent basis. I used to be more consistent with it, where I would do 15 to 20 to 30 minutes a day. I've realized that for me, meditation has evolved, and it comes in different forms. I used to believe that meditation is only available if I'm sitting down and not doing anything. Now I'm able to meditate or, so to speak, get into that level of awareness when I'm just taking a walk. So for me, it's evolved. I think if anything, what I've learned through my own meditation practice is it for more so for me boils down to my ability to become aware of just the world surrounding me, my breathing and everything around it. One thing that you got me curious as you were sharing your story, Scott, and as Melody has shared hers, um, do you take full breaths? Because I realized throughout my time, I don't actually take full breaths. And one theory that I've heard for that is because of the different traumas that I experienced during my childhood, is that I actually taught myself to breathe more in survival mode. And I wonder how many people can relate to that. So I know for a fact, one of the reasons why I cough, I'm sure you've noticed when I was staying with you, is because of a shortness of breath.
Really?
I guarantee it. Yeah, I think it is because of that. And so I had a conversation with a therapist couple months to a year ago, and she said one of the reasons why it might happen is because of the childhood trauma I experienced, which taught me to breathe in a survival mode instead of being able to take full belly breaths. Right now, if I were to take a full belly breath, I would cough.
That's fascinating. It's interesting because when I was heavy duty weightlifting, for a long time, I did deep breaths, but they were lung breaths. And then as I began to move to really, really heavy weight loads, I felt like lung breaths were not necessarily giving me the oxygen that I needed, to lift myself up, particularly if it was a bench press or if it was a squat, where what I'd be lifting up was very, very, very heavy. And so I learned to breathe through my diaphragm. I would breathe in, fill out my stomach, and then exhale that way. And now some people in the bodybuilding community, and I was never really a bodybuilder, so it doesn't count.
How do you retrain yourself how do you retrain yourself to breathe in a new way, though?
I practiced over and over, and I will say this, the fear response that I had, particularly when doing squats at a very, very heavy weight, always reminded me it was terrifying to sort of think about going in there and lifting anything other than a warm-up without taking a belly breath after a while. Now, I don't know how much of that terror was real, but I used to read this magazine called Powerlifting USA. And in one of the specialties that Powerlifting USA had were images usually involving squats of horrifying, and I mean horrifying, weightlifting accidents. Someone lifting too much, more than their legs usually, or their diaphragm or their bowels could handle. And these were the sorts of things you cannot unsee. And so those gave me a constant replenishment of horrific things that I could imagine about the minute I started to do that weight. So I always made sure I breathed through my stomach. I was too scared not to. Could always just see these shocking images happening and it being me.
Miriam has joined us here.
Oh, Miriam, how wonderful. It is so good to see you. Thank you for joining us. We obviously want to hear your remarks.
I would be really curious to hear from Miriam and Melody, as well as you, Scott. What made you realize the importance of breathing? Like, I know for me, one of the things I'm learning now, and I can't say it has become a top priority, maybe because I haven't experienced whatever event that I might have to experience in order to help me see this, but allergies. I've learned that actually breathing, there's one study, or a couple people have told me this, that when they change the way they breathe, it changed their allergies. And so I'm curious, this might be a good question for Miriam as well, like, what was that event and why been reinforcing new practice when it got you here, right?
Well, it is interesting. There is a friend of mine, two friends of mine, who for years have been urging me to do breath work, which is a type of meditation. And there's a special name for what they do. I don't know it. I resisted this like crazy because one of their supposed reasons that they want me to do this, one of the benefits of it is that it calms you down.
It's not.
I don't want to be calm.
Is it?
I don't know benefit.
It's not the Wim Hof method.
I don't know. It might be that, honestly. I'm not familiar enough. This whole it'll calm you down things terrified me so much I realized I could never do it.
You think it would take away part of your personality? You think
It
it would
would
take
take
away part of your personality?
exactly. That's like asking
Strip away
Jaws
the
not.
identity.
Yeah, that's like asking Jaws not to eat a swimmer. Come on, what do you
Yeah.
expect the shark to do? And so, in any event, Miriam, it is so good to know I let your hair stand up on your hair and your skin lift up. I
Her
hope
hair
that's a
is
compliment.
breathing.
I hope it is. In any event, why was this? Oh, and one of the benefits that they said is that in the many years since both of them started doing this, they never got a cold again. Now, I have to admit, not getting colds is a pretty significant benefit.
Yeah.
That made it almost worth exploring. Not quite, but almost.
Yeah.
I'll say this about when I first learned about the importance of breathing. It is the most vivid example, or the most vivid time it came into my knowledge, was when I was younger. I was in maybe my first or second year of practice. I was at the time dating a doctor, and the doctor told me that when I was, or he was a medical student, he told me that when I was sleeping, I stopped breathing over and over again. He said, you're snoring, but you're not breathing it's not like a normal snore. It's like you take stuff and then you stop breathing, then you shake, and then you wake up. I didn't have any recollection of this, although I knew that I snored. And so we went and I did a sleep study, and they told me I had sleep apnea. And it was very surprising to them that I had it because I was so young, and then I was in inordinately good shape, which is rare for people in that condition. But I went in for an operation. The operation was a complete disaster. I, just as an aside, tell people there's no such thing as easy or mild or minor surgery. This was supposed to be an in and out sort of thing. I was in the hospital for weeks. I was out of work for well over a month. It was traumatic. It was awful. And one of the things that happened was that I was in the intensive care unit afterwards because of the disaster that this surgery was. And I was on a ventilator. And after a couple of days, my doctor suggested that I go off the ventilator, and they removed it. And then they told me that, to just sort of report how I was doing. And I think I was the only person that was in the intensive care room when this happened. I had this total Joan Crawford nurse. And I told her my head's really hurting and my chest is really, really hurting. And I said, my chest is hurting really bad. And she was like, shut up. Don't bother us with your crap. You're making it up. You're being dramatic. And I was like, no, this really, really hurts. And then I started screaming, and she's like, I'm going to put the ventilator over your mouth again just to shut you up. And then all of a sudden I could feel the skin around my head just expanding, and my head blew up. And this pain in my chest became dramatic. But when my head was literally blowing up, couldn't deny something was wrong. It turns out that my left lung was collapsing, and I couldn't breathe.
That's intense.
Yeah, it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And it was a long time afterwards before I could or would sleep a full night because I was so scared of not breathing. I remember that I think it was almost like, Melody, you might have a good term for this, just sort of knowing you, that it was almost like this recurring memory of what happened. I would be asleep, and then all of a sudden I'd think I'm not breathing, and I'd wake up, and I'd be in a panic mode. And I would have to like take all of these breaths. And so when it comes to my earliest experience of what it might be like not to breathe, that was it. Incomparably terrifying, scary, a horrible way to die.
That's a really terrifying experience. That's a really terrifying experience to go through. And I like I said, I've never experienced what you've experienced, and I also get curious, like how does that even happen? How we're able to come onto this planet and just have the ability to breathe? I mean, I don't know. Does anyone teach us how to breathe? Probably not, right? We'll probably just take it in and out. I think over time it can be modified.
Yeah.
But I also wonder, and you kind of going back to the behavior component, to what degree do you think something has to become so extreme in order for your behavior to change, such as the ability to rewire yourself for a new technique of breathing? Does it have to become a life or death in order for you to actually make the change and prioritize that?
I wonder to what extent there may be some gender issues there. And the reason why I say that, and Miriam, thank you for this
Yeah.
very comprehensive remark. I'm actually putting it up on the screen and keeping it here for a while so that anyone watching will have a chance to absorb it and maybe read it a couple of times, because I think it's worth that. So I have read that when it comes to health problems generally, heart attacks or heart conditions or obesity or diabetes, or even some types of cancers, or just back pains generally, men are far more resistant to doing anything about it. And therefore, it sometimes takes men facing an emergency before they will make these sorts of changes. Whereas women apparently are not, this is not across the board, and I'm sure these are generalizations and there are exceptions to everything. I just want to make that clear. But that women, as a general matter, are more conscious of the fact that there may be potential risks to their health when they feel pain or when they feel anything unusual going on, and take care of it immediately. And the theory around this is, I don't know whether it's true or not. I don't even know whether I believe it. And especially since the two participants in the audience so far that have been most dominant have been female. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is that this may stem from sort of the maternal role that many women are biologically hardwired, that it's in their interest to be able to protect their children, so they are more cognizant of what's going on in their body, so they can do that, so they can be there for their children. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know anything. Thoughts, Oleg, Miriam, Melody?
I think it probably is to a degree. There's an element of truth, and I think part of the fact that it has to do with males, at least from my point of view, when I was raised and able the quote unquote born of me, I realized how much shame there was around acknowledging such things as weaknesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging the fact that you might have a breathing problem, you might have an injury, you might have, I mean, think about the number of times we've been told to either walk it off or get over it or stop complaining about it. All those things are phrases that, yeah, they may not carry as much impact, but they do. They carry a lot of impact because they form on our identities. At least for me, it formed my identity for so many years, where I literally, by choice, forced myself to acknowledge some of these things as problems, because then I would have been perceived as the weak link,
Yeah.
right? In
Yeah.
society, in a group, in a family, whatever it might be. So I think there's probably a huge general gender difference when it comes to being aware of one's health. And I think, to Melody's point, and I know you brought this up again, but I think it's worthwhile revisiting, women are usually more in tune with their body.
Thank you both for that. And
Mhm.
Miriam, I'd be curious to know a little bit more detail about what you mean when you say it's a cultural thing too. I'm actually quite curious about that. It's funny. Perhaps that explains some things that I felt very challenged by when I was growing up. So, for instance, when I was, I don't remember how old I was. It was just a couple of years ago. I couldn't have been over.
Yeah, let's not date ourselves.
Exactly. It was back a couple of years ago, after Taylor Swift had already been around for a decade. I was feeling pain in my teeth. And it was so painful. I mean, anyone who's had a toothache, it hurt so bad. And I remember wanting to cry. And my father, he and I went to the Air Force Base, to the commissary, to get some food. And it was a long, 45-minute drive each way. And I remember tears were streaming down my face. And he was like, shut up, you're not, take it like a man, you're being a wuss, all this sort of stuff. And then when we got home, all of a sudden, my gum above the tooth that was hurting, it just burst, and blood was coming out everywhere. I came to my parents, said something like, "Are you sure I shouldn't be upset?" And of course, I was in the dentist's office in 10 minutes. But it was one of those things where something seriously was going on, And this whole idea about, oh, just toughen up, be quiet, shut up, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It was a total joke. But, looking at it from the perspective of my parents' time and the place I was raised, which was in a rural
Right.
community in the American Midwest, there was a lot of that thinking. Men don't whine about anything. Men just suffer.
Men
this,
don't
that, and the other.
cry.
Men
Yeah.
don't cry. And my dad probably was doing that to protect me, not to be abusive, but to be just like, look, you're going to have to deal with stuff in life. Toughen up. It's just
Yeah.
pain.
Yeah. I think that's the big thing that I'm realizing throughout all of these is the number of narratives that I've lived and I'm having to rewrite literally on a daily basis, right? And I know for a fact that even in regard to going back to the concept of breathing and at what point will I prioritize the fact that I don't know how to fully breathe? And I think I'm getting to that point now. I think when it becomes a huge, not a problem, but more of an inconvenience, having to constantly cough to get air, right? I think that's one thing that I'm realizing, and I'm also realizing that there are just so many things that I'm learning on a daily basis, and it's really becoming important for me to understand that if breathing is the most important thing, then I have to prioritize that. I have to put that at the top of the ladder. I have to invest time and energy and resources in order to learn how to do it.
First of all, Miriam, I want to thank you again so much for your remarks. Really interesting. These are the cultural mores and beliefs that you're talking about are from cultures that I've never had the privilege of being a part of. And so I love being able to read what you said and learn. And thank you for sharing that with anyone who is watching or listening to this down the road. I think you're really being generous, and it's very much appreciated. What about other autonomic functions? What about functions like hearing or sight? Do you think you can control those? Would you control those?
No, I don't think I can control any of them. I think if anything, I could probably bring more attention to them. But as far as how they're produced and how they function, I don't know. I mean, sure, there are things that we could do to enhance some of them. I think so, but at the same time, how it's actually made and how it helps us experience this world through the lens that we're able to, I truly don't think I can control any of those. And it makes me more grateful. It makes me more grateful that I'm able to experience the world the way that I am, because at any given moment, one of those sites could be taken away by accident or by choice or whatever it might be. And I've heard many people through the podcast, on the Overcoming Odds, as I'm sure you've heard it on Purpose Highway, where people have said things that they've lost their sight, they've lost their hearing. All of a sudden they woke up and it was gone. When they were 50, when they were 60, when they were in their 20s. So you just never know what's going to happen next. And it makes me realize that I don't know what I don't know. I don't know much in control about whatever the circumstances I'm going through. And then the best I could probably do is just be in the now and experience what I can with what I have. Trying to toughen up, man, is
Yeah, Melody, thank you for your thoughts on that. I find that very interesting, and it goes as to a large, set of larger debates that we're having across the world with regards to the role of masculinity and what really tough is and what isn't. A lot of times, this sort of tough stuff actually is disguising weakness too. It's just talk. Then sometimes it really is being tough, but I think that you're right, at least in my opinion, Melody. Real tough comes to maybe putting on a stiff upper lip or being willing to engage in difficult circumstances, but when it really deserves attention. I think that, at least in my opinion, I don't think this is, and I would stand by this opinion, I would be seriously, I'll have some opinions about anyone who might feel differently, but for instance, President Zelensky in the Ukraine right now, like, that's being tough in a way a lot of people can't even imagine. But that's real tough, as opposed to, don't express emotions tough. And Oleg, who is calling.
Yeah, I think it's real. No, I think I'm really glad we're able to have this conversation, because I don't think this is something that's had many times.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
I'm fortunate to be able to share this space with you and Melody and Miriam, who's joined us, and everyone else that's going to be tuning in, because I think it's through these conversations I'm able to learn and better understand my own circumstances and what I can prioritize and what I can't ultimately.
One thing that I think shows real toughness is when you
Yeah,
are out there in this world and the odds are stacked against you. You might be part of a group that,
yeah,
for instance, has 90% unemployment. And you're out there looking for a job, and everyone ridicules you, or you don't have the same sort of opportunities. But you keep persisting, and you keep coming in, you keep having hope, and then eventually you find that place that's going to hire you, and that place changes your life, and you become almost like a renewed spirit, like a phoenix arising out of nothing. Do you know any company that does that for the people that work for it?
Spectrum Designs Foundation. That's a company that you and I chose to align with. That is a shirt that you're wearing right now. That's sponsored by them. Mine is in the wash because I've only brought 3 shirts all on this trip, and I can only wear one of them for so long. But I'm really happy to be a part of it. I'm really happy that they chose to align missions and kind of put our hands together to make this happen. And I think there's a lot to be said about what they do and what they choose to stand for, and the opportunities, quote unquote, that they create for others to breathe, right? To experience
Absolutely.
another day, to experience another life, to recreate a new identity if needed. So I would love to be able to share a clip about them, but maybe before we do that, what are some ways that people can connect with us? And I know that Melody and Miriam are fully aware as far as how they can connect with us, but I don't know if I don't think it ever hurts
I agree. Well,
to be
you
able to
are,
refresh
yeah,
people's memories, right?
I completely agree. I mean, you're the CEO and founder of an incredible nonprofit, as well as a host of a couple of podcasts. Why don't you tell us a little bit about them and where we can find about you? And those words are not
The
coming out of my
best
mouth well tonight.
the best way is through Overcoming Odds, and for anyone that's aware of it, it's a space for people to be able to rewrite their narrative, rewrite their story. In fact, we have an event coming up in September in Austin, Texas on September 23rd called Survive to Thrive, Face Your Fears. It's going to be a 3-day summit where we're going to have a variety of speakers. Almost every single one of them have actually been a guest on this show. Nancy John, Casey, Steve Gamlin, a couple others, where we'll explore essentially the origins of one's fears and ways to transform those fears. And I know that you're a huge believer in our work. I'm a huge believer in your work and what you do with Purpose Highway. And I'd love to be able to pass the torch on to you and give you a chance as well to tell people a little bit about where they can find different episodes and what Purpose Highway is all about.
Thank you. Purpose Highway is in its 2nd season. It is a podcast that explores some of the changes in thinking that are the most profound in our society today. It is thinking about and talking to individuals who are plotting new pathways forward with regards to ethics, purpose, and spirituality in an era wherein the traditional institutions that have guided people in their search for meaningful connections, such as religious institutions, civic organizations, and other large spaces of connectivity, are in decline. With the absence of these guideposts for purpose, spirituality, and ethics, the creativity that people have when it comes to finding, uncovering, remembering, or just outright creating new spaces for that sort of thinking is unbelievable and amazing. And it touches some surprising corners of our lives, everything from environmentalism to neurology to grief. And so I ask that people follow us at purposehighway.com. And if you like what we do, leave a review on Apple. And definitely follow us on YouTube. We want to make people think, and we hope we're doing so.
Mm-hmm.
adventure.